Okay, so I'm a bit late. Uh, I'm not feeling too well. I got the flu, so that's why it took me a little bit to kind of get on here and start talking. I was a bit sick, but I do have some plans for the royal path. It's not only going to be talking about the royal path. I'm probably going to deal with mainly just stuff on Father Seraphim Rose and um, but yeah. So the first thing I got is his article on the royal path, so I figured we'd start there. Um, it's called The Royal Path, True Orthodoxy in the Age of Apostasy by Father Seraphim Rose. And it says, as the fathers say, the extremes from both sides are equally harmful. We must go on the royal path, avoiding the streams on both sides. St. John Cassian, Conference 2. Orthodox Christians live today in one of the great critical times in the history of Christ's church. The enemy of man's salvation, the devil, attacks on all fronts and strives by all means not merely to divert believers from the path of salvation shown by the church, but even to conquer the church of Christ itself, despite the Savior's promise, Matthew 16 and 18. And to convert the very body of Christ into a, quote, ecumenical organization, preparing for the coming of his own chosen one, Antichrist, the great world leader of the last days. So this is pretty a common theme that what we talk about here, that, he's talking about an ecumenical organization for the coming of Antichrist. You'll hear a lot of people say, well, the World Council of Churches isn't, it's not heretical. They're just doing dialogues, Well, it's not so. But anyways, of course, we know that this attempt of Satan will fail. The church will be the bride of Christ even to the end of the world. It will meet Christ, the bridegroom, at his second coming, pure and undefiled by adulterous union with the apostasy of this age. But the great question of our times for all Orthodox Christians to face is a where am I? Oh, the church will remain, but how many of us will still be in it, having withstood the devil's mighty attempts to draw us away from it? Our times are much like St. Mark of Ephesus in the 15th century, when it seemed that the church was about to be dissolved into the impious union with the Latins. Nay, our times are even worse and more dangerous than those times. For hold on, more dangerous than those times. Where I'm reading from is a little difficult to read. So, hey, how y'all doing? How you doing, Isaac? Hello. Yeah, definitely some technical difficulties. So, let's see if I could find another place, because I'm having difficulty reading where I'm reading it from. I have it somewhere else. Okay, come on now. Well, I'm just gonna read it from there. Whatever. Okay. Our times are much like those of St. Mark of Ephesus in the 15th century, when it seemed that the church was about to be dissolved into the impious union with the Latins. Nay, our times are even worse and more dangerous than those times, for then the union was an act imposed by force from without, while now the Orthodox people have been long prepared for their approaching, quote, ecumenical merger of all churches and religions by decades of laxness, indifference, worldliness, and indulgence in themselves. In the ruinous falsehood that nothing really separates us from all who call themselves Christians. The Orthodox Church survives as the false union of Florence and even knew a time of outward prosperity and inward spiritual flourishing after that. But after the new false union now being pursued with ever increasing momentum, will orthodoxy exist at all save in the catacombs in the desert? During the past 10 years or more, under the disastrous, quote, ecumenical course pursued by Patriarch Athenagoras and his successor, the Orthodox churches have already perilously close to total shipwreck. The newest ecumenical statement of the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Thyatira Confession, you can see the Orthodox Word, January through February 1976, is already sufficient evidence of how far the Orthodox conscience has been lost by the local church that once was first among the Orthodox churches in the confession of Christ's truth. This dismal document only shows how close the hierarchs of Constantinople have now come to belong absorbed into the heterodox Christianity of the West, even before the formal union which is still being prepared. The roots of today's ecumenism in the Orthodox Church go back to the renovationism and modernism of certain hierarchs in the 1920s. In the Russian Church, these currents produced the first, quote, living church movement, which with the help of the communist regime, tried to overthrow Patriarch Tikhon and reform the church in a radically Protestant manner. And then, as a more, quote, conservative successor to the living church, the Surgenist church organization, the Moscow Patriarchate, which emphasized at first the political side of reconciliation with the communist ideology and aims in accordance with the infamous Declaration of Metropolitan Sergius in 1927, and only in recent decades has ventured once again into the realm of ecclesiastical renovationism with its active participation in the ecumenical movement. In the Greek Church, the situation has been similar. The Renovationist Pan-Orthodox Council of 1923, with its Protestant reforms inspired by Patriarch Meletius Meltekes of sorry memory, proved to be too radical for the Orthodox world to accept, and the Renovationists had to be satisfied imposing a counterform on several of the non-Slavic churches. Large movements of protest opposed the reformers in both the Russian and Greek churches, producing the deep divisions which exist until now in the Orthodox world. By the way, funny enough, where I'm reading from, um, some of you might know of the channel Orthodox Wisdom. So he had read this one time, and he did a reading on it, and there is messages between him and Hieromonk Damascene, where Damascene tells him, to take the recording down because he didn't want people to know, you know, that how I would assume that Father Seraphim Rose seeing our position, especially as far as the Catacomb Church and the True Orthodox Church of Greece. So this is really vindicating for the True Orthodox that indeed Father Seraphim Rose was one of ours. But it goes on. It says large movements of protest opposed the reformers in both the Russian and Greek churches, producing deep divisions which exist until now in the Orthodox world. Um, in the Russian church, Sergianism was decisively rejected by very many of the bishops and faithful, led by Metropolitan Joseph of Petrograd rather. This, quote, Josephite movement later became organized to some extent and became known as the, quote, True Orthodox Church. The history of this illegal, quote, catacomb church of Russia is to this day veiled in secrecy. But in the past few years, a number of startling evidence of its present-day activities have come to light, leading to stern repressive measures on the part of the Soviet government. So how's everybody doing? Yeah, I thought I wasn't gonna do this, but I decided to anyways. Why not? You know. So the history of the illegal catacomb church of Russia is to this day veiled in secrecy. But in the past few years, a number of startling evidence of its present day activities have come to light, leading to stern repressive measures on the part of the Soviet government. The name of its present chief hierarch, Metropolitan Theodosius, has become known, as has that of one of its 10 or more bishops, Bishop Seraphim, in the diaspora. The Russian church outside of Russia committed itself from the very beginning of Sergianism in 1927 to a firm anti-Sergianist position, and on numerous occasions it expressed its solidarity with the true Orthodox Church in Russia, while refusing all communion with the Moscow Patriarchate. This is really important to note that since the very inception of ROCOR, they rejected the Moscow Patriarchate and they sided with the Catacomb Church, you know. And why is it today that ROCOR is no longer in communion with the Greek old calendars or the Catacomb Church? And I would say that's because they were infiltrated by the KGB in 2007, as was the Catacomb Church. And while Metropolitan Joseph was involved with it. So, and I'll read a little bit about that later because it kind of ties into what I'm talking about here. It says, its uncompromisingness and staunch traditionalism in this and other matters were not to the taste of several of the Russian hierarchs of the Western Europe and America, who were more receptive to the, quote, reforms, currents in the 20th century orthodoxy, and they separated themselves at various times from the ROCOR, thus creating the present jurisdictional differences of the Russian diaspora, rather. In Greece, the movement of protest by similar Orthodox instinct likewise took the name of the, quote, true Orthodox Christians. From the beginning in 1924, when the calendar reform was introduced, this movement had been especially strong among the simple monks, priests, and laymen of Greece. The first bishop to leave the state church of Greece and join the movement was Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Florina, and today it continues in its fully independent life and organization, comprising about 1/4 of all the Orthodox Christians of Greece. It's a lot, and perhaps 1/2 or more of all the monks and nuns. Although popularly known as the, quote, old calendarists, the true Orthodox of Greece stand for a staunch traditionalism in Orthodox life and thought in general, viewing the calendar question merely as the first stage in a touchstone of modernism and reformism. As the, quote, ecumenical cancer eats more and more away at the remaining sound organs of the Orthodox churches today, an increasing sympathy is shown by the most sensitive members of the, quote, official church jurisdictions for the cause, and the representatives of the anti-ecumenist, anti-reformist churches of Russia, Greece, and the diaspora. And some seeing the, quote, official jurisdiction is now irrevocably set on a course of anti-orthodoxy are abandoning them as sinking ships and joining the ranks of the true Orthodox Christians. Others, still hoping for the restoration of an Orthodox course in world orthodoxy, think it is enough for now and to express sympathy for the true Orthodox jurisdictions. I think it's interesting to kind of note that at this time, the way he's seen things and how they kind of, snub over this history. And I think it's a dangerous thing to do, considering how pretty open he was with talking about this. So it goes on. The 10 years of anti-ecumenist epistles of Metropolitan Philaret, chief hierarch of the Rocor, have struck a responsive chord within a number of the Orthodox churches. Even in the, quote, official response to them has been largely silence or hostility. Today, more than at any other time in the 50-year struggle to preserve the Orthodox tradition in an age of apostasy, the voice of true and uncompromising orthodoxy could be heard throughout the world and have a profound effect on the future course of the Orthodox churches. Probably indeed, it is already too late to prevent the renovationist, quote, Eighth Ecumenical Council and the Ecumenical Union with lies beyond that. But perhaps one or more of the local churches may be persuaded to step back from this ruinous path, which will lead to the final liquidation as orthodox of those jurisdictions that follow it to the end. And in any case, individuals and whole communities can certainly be saved from this path, not to mention of those of the heterodox who may still find their way into the saving enclosure of the true Church of Christ. It is of critical importance, therefore, that this voice be actually of one of true, that is patristic orthodoxy. Unfortunately, sometimes happens, especially in the heat of controversy, that basically sound orthodox positions are exaggerated on one side and misunderstood on the other. And thus an entirely misleading impression is created in some minds that the cause of true orthodoxy today is some kind of, quote, extremism, a sort of, quote, right-wing reaction to the prevailing, quote, left-wing course now being followed by the leaders of, quote, official Orthodox churches. Such a political view of the struggle for true orthodoxy today is entirely false. This struggle, on the contrary, has taken the form among its best representatives today, whether in Russia, Greece, or the diaspora, of a return of the patristic path of moderation, a mean between extremes. This is what the Holy Fathers call the royal path. The teaching of this royal path is set forth, for example, in the 10th of St. Abba Dorotheus Spiritual Instructions, where he quotes especially the Book of Deuteronomy. Ye shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left, but go by the royal path. That's Deuteronomy 5:22 and 17 and 11. And St. Basil the Great said, upright of heart is he whose thought does not turn away either to excess or to lack, but is directed only to the mean of virtue. But perhaps this teaching is most clearly expressed by the Orthodox Father of the 5th century, St. John Cassian, who was faced with a task not unlike our own Orthodox task today, to present the pure teaching of the Eastern Fathers to Western people who were spiritually immature and did not yet understand the depth and subtlety of the Eastern spiritual doctrine, and were therefore inclined to go to extremes, either on over-laxness or over-strictness. And in applying it to life, St. Cassian sets forth the orthodox doctrine of the royal path in his conference on sober-mindedness or discretion. The conference praised by St. John of the Ladder, step 4 and 105, for its beautiful and sublime philosophy. With all our strength and with all our effort, we must strive by humility to acquire for ourselves the good gift of sober-mindedness, which can preserve us unharmed by excess from both sides. For as the Fathers say, the extremes from both sides are equally harmful, both excess of fasting and filling the belly, excess of vigil and excessive sleep, and other excesses. Quote, sober-mindedness teaches a man to go on the royal path, avoiding the extremes on both sides. On the right side, it does not allow to be deceived by excess abstinence. On the left side, to be drawn into carelessness and relaxation. On the temptation on the right is even more dangerous um, than that on the left. Excessive abstinence is more harmful than satiating oneself. Something I want to point out right now is that, there's a particular priest that likes to talk about the royal path, and I want you to just think about this for a second. They usually paint true Orthodox as, a temptation on the right. Well, according to Father Seraphim Rose, that's not the case, and it's a misrepresentation to even state that. Has there been some that claim to be true Orthodox that sort of went too excessive with it? Absolutely. And the temptation on the right side is even more dangerous than that on the left. Excessive abstinence is more harmful than satiating oneself because, with the cooperation of repentance, one may go over from the latter to a correct understanding, but the former one cannot, i.e., because pride over one's, quote, virtue stands in the way of repentance, humility that could save one. Okay, so we're continuing. How's everybody doing? Just checking on everybody. Hey, how you doing? Appreciate it. Yeah, that's a great read there. Father Seraphim Rose on the old calendars. Great read. I've been reading that too. Maybe eventually I'll read it on here, but not yet. Anyways, applying this teaching to our own situation, we may say that the royal path of the true orthodoxy today is a mean that lies between the extremes of ecumenism and reformism on one side, and, quote, a zeal not according to knowledge, Romans 10 and 2, on the other. True orthodoxy does not go in, quote, in the step with the times, on the one hand, nor does it make, quote, strictness or correctness or canonicity, good in themselves, an excuse for Pharisaic self-satisfaction or exclusivism and distrust on the other. This true orthodox moderation is not to be confused with mere lukewarmness or indifference, or with any kind of compromise between political extremes. The spirit of reform is so much in the air today that anyone whose views are molded by the spirit of the times will regard true orthodox moderation as close to fanaticism. But anyone who um, looks at the question more deeply and applies the patristic standard will find the royal path to be far from any kind of extremism. Perhaps no Orthodox teacher in our own days provides such an example of sound and fervent Orthodox moderation as the late Archbishop of Urki of Jordanville. In his numerous articles and sermons breathe the refreshing spirit of true Orthodox zealotry, without any deviation either to the right or to the left, with the emphasis constantly on the spiritual side of true orthodoxy. See especially his article, Holy Zeal in the Orthodox Word, May through June 1975. The Russian church outside of Russia has been placed by God's providence in a very favorable position for preserving the royal path, amidst the confusion of so much of the 20th century orthodoxy. Living in exile and poverty in the world that has not understood the suffering her people, she has focused her attention on preserving unchanged the faith which unites her people. And so, quite naturally, she finds herself a stranger to the whole ecumenical mentality, which is based on religious indifference and self satisfaction, material affluence, and soulless internationalism. Um, on the other hand, she has been preserved from falling into extremism on the right side. such as might be of a declaration that the mysteries of the Moscow Patriarchate are without grace. By her vivid awareness that the surge in his church in Russia is not free, one can, of course, have no communion with such a body, dominated by atheists, but precise definitions of its status are best left to a free Russian council in the future. I would like to point out that, St. Philaret did say that he thought their mysteries were graceless. And I understand why he said that. So, but I do see Father Seraphim's position here. If there seems to be a, quote, logical contradiction here, if you don't deny her mysteries, why don't you have communion with her? It is a problem only for rationalists, those who approach church questions with the heart as well as the head have no trouble accepting this position, which is the testament bequeathed to the Russian Church, the diaspora, by her wise chief hierarch, Metropolitan Anastasi, in 1965. Living in freedom, the Rokor has considered as one of her important obligations to express her solidarity and full communion with the underground True Orthodox Church of Russia, whose existence is totally ignored and even denied by the, quote, official orthodoxy. In God's time, when the terrible trial of the Russian Church and people will have passed, the other Orthodox churches may understand the Russian Church situation better. Until then, it is perhaps all one can hope for, that the free Orthodox churches have never questioned the right of the Russian Church outside of Russia to exist or to deny the grace of her mysteries. Almost all of them have long remained in communion with her until her non-participation in the ecumenical movement isolated her and made her approach to the other churches, especially in the last decade. And up to this day, they have at least passively resisted the politically inspired attempts of the MP to have her declared, quote, schismatic and, quote, uncanonical. Doesn't that sound, familiar? So even in Father Seraphim's time here, he was dealing with these claims of schismatic and uncanonical. And why is that? It seems like we're kind of a mirror to their position in world orthodoxy. We make it really apparent that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And unfortunately, if you read the anathema, which we've been through that already, it's kind of like, if you're disseminating for ecumenists, you end up falling under that anathema. And that seems to be the case. We're not seeing a whole lot of people say, like, I agree with you. Like he's talking about some of these people that were in official jurisdictions. We're seeing excuses and lies and everything in the book to sort of smoke screen away from the truth. And being that aware of Christ, we can't do that. That's, every lie is damned to hell, So anyways, in recent years, the Rokor has also given support and recognition to the true Orthodox Christians of Greece, whose situation has long been exceedingly difficult and misunderstood. In Greece, the first blow against the Church, the calendar reform, was not as deadly as the declaration of Metropolitan Sergius in Russia, and for this reason it has taken longer for the theological consciousness of the Orthodox Greek people to see its full anti-Orthodox significance. Further, few bishops in Greece have been bold enough to join the movement, whereas by contrast, the number of non-Sergius bishops in the beginning was larger than the whole episcopate of the Greek Church. And only in recent years has the cause of the old counters become even a little, quote, intellectually respectable, as more and more university graduates have joined it. Over the years, it has suffered persecutions, sometimes quite fierce, from the state and the official church, and to this day it remains disdained by the, quote, sophisticated and totally without recognition from the official Orthodox world. Oh, there's a quote there. So he keeps quoting official here. That's pretty important too, because again, he's He's viewing world orthodoxy the way we do. Unfortunately, internal disagreements and divisions have continued to weaken the cause of the old Congress, and they lack a single unanimous voice to express their stand for patristic orthodoxy. Still, the basic orthodoxy of their position cannot be denied, and one can only welcome a sound presentation of it, as may be seen in the article that follows in the issue of the TOW Webmaster. I wonder what that is. The increasing realization in recent years of the basic oneness of the cause of true orthodoxy throughout the world, whether in the Catacomb Church of Russia, the old calendarists of Greece, or the Russian church outside of Russia, has led some to think in terms of a united front of confessing churches to oppose the ecumenical movement, which is taking possession of official orthodoxy. However, there's a quote there again, forgive me. So, however, under present conditions, this will hardly come to pass. In any case, this is too political a view of the situation, which sees the significance of the mission of true orthodoxy in too external a manner. The full dimensions of the true Orthodox protest against, quote, ecumenical orthodoxy, against the neutralized, lukewarm orthodoxy of the apostasy, have yet to be revealed, above all in Russia. But it cannot be that the witness of so many martyrs and confessors and champions of true orthodoxy in the 20th century will be in vain. May God preserve his zealots in the royal path of true orthodoxy, faithful to him and to his holy church until the end of the age. That's from the Orthodox Word, September to October, 1976, issue 70. I think that's pages 143 through 149. So I do have some more here. Oh, yeah, that's great. It's a very interesting subject. Sermon on the Mount really, how will I apply this in my life? 9 blessings, none can be without the other. Yeah, indeed, indeed. Okay, so we're moving on from this point, and let's see. I got something here that I want to pull up. Okay, where did I put this? Okay. Let's see. That ain't it. All right. Okay. Well, okay. I'm looking for what I put to the side to sort of speak on these things, but where did I put this? Well, I'm just going to read this quote real quick. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay. I'm going to actually find what I was looking for because it actually deals with what we're talking about. I want to put it in another section. So, okay. So, I'm going to read something that says, "The misuse of the monastic father's expression, the royal path," by, this is by Bishop Philaretos. And I thought it would just be interesting to read this. So it says, "It is common in today's world to try to convince someone of your belief, even if that means purposely manipulating a term or a text in a way that it wasn't meant to be used. Using a term seems to give importance and uh, importance to a theory. That this catechesis of terms is especially misleading in ecclesiastical writings when patristic expressions are misused and unethical if it's purposely done. The use of a holy canon or patristic terms seem to give an air of truth to the theory. Often, though, these canons and terms are used either incompletely or in a way they were never meant to be used. This confuses the reader and allows them to believe that the fathers said things that they never really said. Let's look at the use of the expression, the quote, royal path, and how this term used by the father is not like its present use in many ecclesiastical circles. General meaning. In the general, and even before it was used in Christianity, the term royal path literally meant the royal or king's path in Greek, meant the path that belonged to the king. The term in ancient times is usually connected to Euclid. Euclid? I don't know how to say this. The father of geometry. Euclid. Whatever. Okay. Euclides. There you go. Sometimes given the name Euclid of Alexandria to distinguish him from Euclides of Megara, was a Greek mathematician often referred to as the founder of geometry or the father of geometry. He was active in Alexandria during the reign of. Oh, I'm so bad at reading right now. I'm quite sick, so that's what's going on with me. Ptolemy the First. So that's 323 to 283 BC. When Ptolemy asked Euclides for an easier method to learn geometry, Euclides is said to have responded, "There is no royal path in geometry." Here the meaning is clear that geometry requires a struggle, and the struggle is necessary even for the king. Okay, in the Desert Fathers, among the fathers of the desert, this expression was used concerning asceticism. The fathers warned against extremes in asceticism because attempting too strict of an asceticism can give birth to physical ailment, which could be a blessing for some, but for the less spiritual prepared could open the door to leaving asceticism altogether. And too little asceticism can bring a lax and spiritual life. This is how the fathers used the expression. They urged us to, quote, take the royal path, the path of Christ, whose yoke is easy and burden is light. Matthew 11 and 30. And to avoid new paths that can lead to pride and delusion, used in having to do with the days of apostasy. The expression came to be used to speak of a moderate way of true orthodoxy regarding the state of those, quote, churches of world orthodoxy that fell into the heresy of ecumenism. In this sense, it was probably first used by Hieromonk Seraphim Rose. This person is saying, "I do respect some of the early writings of Seraphim Rose. I'm not sure how much he intended to use the term to be coined as a new ideology and speaking of matters of faith. The worst thing that happened, though, is that using a statement in the Fathers in a different context appeared to be more simple as being a statement of the Fathers concerning the matter of the faith and not concerning asceticism as the Fathers meant. St. Mark of Ephesus speaks with the voice of the Fathers when he says, 'There can be no condescension in matters of the faith. This is the true, quote, royal path, or the way of the King of Kings, who tells us with, quote, with certainty that until heaven and earth disappear, not one letter, or one stroke of a letter will disappear from the law until everything has been accomplished.' So, the royal path is what Christ asks of his followers. Christ asks of his followers an exactness of faith. This means belonging to the one ark of salvation, which is the one church, which is not composed of members of ailing in the faith, which means heretics. The church is composed of right believing bishops with their clergy and laity. And even the examples Father Seraphim used are speaking about asceticism. Here's what Father Seraphim writes, and this is from that article we just kind of read from. It says, the teaching of this royal path is set forth, for example, in the 10th of St. Abba Dorotheus Spiritual Instructions, where he quotes especially the Book of Deuteronomy, ye shall not turn aside to the right or to the left, but go by the royal path. And St. Basil the Great, upright of heart, is he whose thoughts does not turn away either to excess or to lack, but is directly only to the means of virtue. Perhaps this teaching is most clearly expressed by the great Orthodox Father of the 15th century, St. John Cassian, who was faced with a task not like our own present Orthodox task today, which is to present the pure teaching of the Eastern Fathers by Western peoples who were spiritually immature and did not yet understand the depth of the subtlety of the Eastern spiritual doctrine, and were therefore inclined to go to extremes, either of laxness or over-strictness. In applying it to life, St. Cassian sets forth in the Orthodox doctrine of the royal path in his conference on sober-mindedness or discretion. The conference is the conference praised by St. John the Latter. Okay. For its beautiful and sublime philosophy, with all our strength and with all our effort, we must strive by humility to acquire ourselves the good gift of sober-mindedness, which can preserve us unharmed by excess by both sides. For as the Fathers say, the extremes from both sides are equally harmful. Both excess of fasting and filling the belly, the excess of vigil, the excess of sleep, other excesses, sober-mindedness, teaching of a man to go the royal path, avoiding the extremes on both sides. On the right side, it does not allow him to be deceived by excessive abstinence. On the left side, to be drawn to carelessness and relaxation. And the temptation on the right side is even more dangerous than that on the left. Excessive abstinence is more harmful than satiating oneself, because with the cooperation of repentance, one may go over from the latter to a correct understanding, but from the former one cannot, i.e., because pride over one's virtue stands in the way of repentance, humility, and humility that could save one. See, here St. Dorotheus is instructing monks about monastic asceticism. The exact words royal path aren't used in the quote in the Book of Deuteronomy, but St. Dorotheus uses the words of Deuteronomy about neither to the left nor to the right to signify the royal path in asceticism. The quote of St. Basil was so strict concerning heresy and schism that an outright heart is one that doesn't turn away either through lack of excess but follows only the way of virtue. That, of course, has nothing to do with matters of the faith. St. John Cassian in his conference is speaking again about matters of asceticism when he talks about our royal path. In no way does he encourage the Westerners to not have strict dogmatic views, as the article might imply. And yes, it is proper that St. John the latter praises St. John Cassian, but again, he is not praising him for a wishy-washy stand on dogmatics, but rather he is praising his instruction to the monastics. When we read the second above quoted paragraph, which probably should have preceded the first paragraph, is to point out directly what the saint was speaking about from the beginning. We see that St. John Cassian is speaking about the ascetical excesses, fasting, filling the belly, vigil, oversleeping, excessive abstinence, and carelessness. Now, what I will say about this right here, I think they might be missing the point a little bit. Like, I feel like Father Seraphim, yes, he might have used the term in another context, but I don't think the term is just stuck on only asceticism. Like, going on the royal path can be kind of applied in every aspect of our lives. And this might be rooted in a little bit of super correctness, but I don't know. I'm not going to outright say that, because that term does get overused and it can be taken wrong. So I'm not going to outright say that, but it could be a little too over logical. I'll just say that. I'll be an advocate for the other side too, for a more moderate stance, because this might be, I don't. So anyways, keeping what was handed down to us from the fathers and the ecumenical councils can never be considered an excess, which I agree with. I agree with that statement. Yeah, I don't believe that's an excess, but it seems like today, during this apostasy we're going through, just holding to the old holy traditions, it is extreme for these people. It's like, the oh, you want to hold to the old calendar? You're crazy. Yeah, all right. Everybody doing all right? I'd say the narrow path is the royal path, right? I think it's one and the same. Yeah, they make fun of it, but you see who uses it. Okay, so we're going to continue. Um, it says, keeping what was handed down to us from the fathers and the ecumenical councils can never be considered an excess. Father Seraphim Rose goes on to say, quote, applying this teaching to our own situation, we can, maybe, he says, we may say that the royal path of true orthodoxy today is a mean that lies between the extremes of ecumenism and reformism on the one side, and a quote, zeal not according to knowledge, Romans 10:2 on the other. True orthodoxy does not go in step with the times on one hand, nor does it make strictness or correctness or canonicity good in themselves an excuse for Pharisaic self-satisfaction, exclusivism, and distrust on the other. This person in this article, he says, now this teaching of the royal path doesn't really have anything to do with our own situation, which is keeping the faith of fathers in a time of apostasy, yet one shouldn't have Pharisaic self-satisfaction for canonicity. But the church doesn't exist outside of canonicity. Now, what Father Seraphim Rose is talking about is that some of the official churches, okay, the official churches have the form, right, of orthodoxy. And oftentimes people aren't knowingly a part of the apostasy. This is what I think his position is. So since they aren't knowingly involved, they can't be held to the same standards. And the possibility that God might, give them economic grace in those situations if they aren't knowingly involved with the apostasy, I think it's possible. But faith really only deals with certainties. Like we can know, like, and it's a secondary question. Like, where is grace is a secondary question to as to where is the church, because they might have economic grace, but I don't believe that you're producing grace in a surgeonistic, schismatic, heretical church, or you're, a part of an ecumenical church. I don't believe that can really produce grace. Everything flows down from the synod of bishops. So if your hierarch is in heresy and all the people around him and all your bishops are commemorating these people, it's it's definitely on shaky ground. And we've also have the anathema out there, so I don't think those people are guaranteed anything, and I'm not trying to like take anything away from them, or I'm not trying to be too extreme. It's not my position to say whether what God's decisions are, but I will say this: it's safer on the ark than off of it. And that's what I think. So, anyways, we go on. Yes, one shouldn't have Pharisaic self-satisfaction for canonicity, but the church doesn't exist outside of canonicity. This interpretation of the royal path as pertinent to dogmatics is something that the followers of Metropolitan Cyprian and the Synod he formed based on a new design, belonging to neither of the church and the beliefs of the true Orthodox, nor his obedience to the world orthodoxy, used to its fullest. I would agree with that statement. It was was a pretty strange position he took. Anyways, it says the danger is the use of the term royal path in talking about true orthodoxy and apostasy is that the simple reader is to believe that the Father stood in the middle of the road on dogmatic issues, that they found strict adherence to the matters of the faith to be going to an extreme. This is precisely the opposite of the truth. When the matters of the faith came up, the Fathers and the Holy Councils chose only the royal path when it means to obedience to the teachings of Christ and his holy apostles. The Fathers didn't turn to left or to right, but remained on a solid path of following the teachings of truth, which is always absolute in this truth that there are never excesses between Christ and the truth and the church where the truth is. As St. Gregory of Palamas assures us when he says, those who belong to the church of Christ are those who are found in the truth. Those who are not in truth don't belong to the church of Christ. Our stand should be that of St. Basil the Great when he tells us we must show boldness for the truth, even if some are scandalized. And I believe that 100%. I think that's a really great quote. And it kind of touches back on, a little bit of what's been going on lately. That some are accusing us of fanaticism and, that we're a little too harsh or the true Orthodox are too rough and divisive and all this stuff. It's like, we got to be bold and stand up for the truth and you're going to be scandalized by it because whether you know it or not, whether you and I'm speaking to somebody specifically, and they probably won't hear this, but it's fine, is that the people that you're associating with are blatantly lying, and they're lying about a lot, and they're getting a lot wrong. I'm not saying that they're doing it on purpose, but something's going on, and I think some of it they do know that they're lying. So it's a very manipulative thing when you're lying and then you get called out on your lie and then you call the person that rude that's calling you out on your garbage. So that's a little bit. I mean, there's people with different positions in true orthodoxy, and I usually take a more moderate stance to try to be charitable to the most extent, but I do agree with a lot of that article. I don't know. So that's something to think about. Let's see if I can find something else on this stuff. And I think maybe it should be clarified, like what Father Seraphim is talking about. So I'm gonna try to maybe dispel this narrative that they're trying to push, from what I understand about it, because they kind of conflate some things. And when I'm talking about them, I'm talking about World Orthodox. So this is an article by Hieromonk Damascene, and I think a lot of World Orthodox use this article as a polemic kind of against us in true Orthodoxy, and I'm going to try to break it down and maybe state some things that they cover over or smoke screen away from that's being stated, and maybe call out some things I don't buy. So it says pastoral guidance, and this is from chapter 84 from Father Seraphim Rose's Life and Work. Suffering is an indication of another kingdom, which we look to. If being Christian meant being happy in this life, we wouldn't need the kingdom of heaven. That's a quote from Father Seraphim Rose. And here's another quote. It says, Orthodoxy can't be comfortable unless it's fake. Father Seraphim. Why does there seem to be so few miracles in our days? It is because believe Father Seraphim that there's so little pain of heart. It's a little handwritten note hidden away and discovered many years after his death. Father Seraphim crystallized into a few words the essence of a great truth of our times. He says, quote, pain of heart is the condition for spiritual growth and the manifestations of God's powers, healings, etc., occurs to those in desperation. Hearts pained but still trusting and hoping in God's help. This is when God acts. The absence of miracles today almost indicates a lack of this pain of heart in man, and even most Orthodox Christians bound up with the quote, growing cold of hearts in the last times. A proof of this statement can be seen in Father Seraphim's own experiences, of course, came, uh, out of which, of course, came, had it not been Eugene's plea before the postcard rack in San Francisco, coming from deep pain of heart, and Glebe's similar pleas before the grave of St. Herman. This had led to the miracle of their meeting and all that they were subsequently able to achieve. All the miracles that Father Seraphim had witnessed in his own life, including those of the greatest miracle worker, Archbishop John, had resulted from the prayers of heart, which did not shrink from the pain of Golgotha. When Father Seraphim was called upon to be a guide of the souls, he was frequently reminded of his spiritual children not to despair in the midst of suffering, but in the words of St. Mark the Ascetic, to endure the pain of heart in the spirit of devotion. Most of those counsels remain only in the minds and hearts of his spiritual children, but some have been preserved in the writings and the pastoral letters which Father Herman gave in obedience of saving in carbon copies. In 1973, after Vladimir and Sylvia Anderson's daughter Maggie died and was buried on Nilble Ridge, Father Seraphim wrote these words to Sylvia. The arching thoughts of Maggie are natural, but that's the side that belongs to earth. Her soul is with God, and the trials which you underwent with her with God's visitations to you. And the proof that everything has been happening there is something deeper than human logic and feelings can fathom. Some people seem to have an easy and uncomplicated path in life, or so it seems from the outside, while for others, like you, everything seems complicated and difficult. Don't let that bother you. Actually, from the spiritual point of view, those who are really having a, quote, easy time are probably in danger. Precisely because without the element of suffering through whatever God sends, there's no spiritual profit of advancement. God knows each of us better than we know ourselves, and he sends what is needful for us, whatever we may think. Maggie's grave is a source of great joy for us. On Thursday after Pascha week, when she died, are commemorating again for the first time. We went there and sang, mingling in the funeral hymns with the Paschal hymns, them breaking and eating eggs, symbols of the resurrection over the grave. Truly, the living and the dead are one in Christ, and it's only our blindness that makes us sometimes forget it. A few years later, in a letter to the spiritual son who was suffering over his experience of politics in the church, Father Seraphim wrote, about your trials, most of them are natural parts of life, and God allows several of them to pile up because you're capable of bearing them. The numbness which comes chiefly from exposure to politics in a sacred place where they do not belong will pass. You must learn to suffer and bear, but not view this as something endless and dreary. Here you are wrong. God sends many consolations, and you will know them again. You must learn to find joy in the midst of increasing doses of sorrow. Thus you can save your soul and help others. To a man in England who was facing similar difficulties, Father Seraphim had the words of counsel. About you personally, of course, I can't give any definitive answer. However, I do know that in spiritual life it is precisely in seemingly impossible conditions that one can begin to grow. Then one has become more sensitive, think less of getting one's own will, and ask what's God's will. Learn to see a little deeper into the reality around one. and all this through suffering, both one's own and that of others. Father Seraphim had a similar thing to a young man who is experiencing loneliness in the world, but at the same time yearning to serve God as a priest. He says, Father Dmitry Dudko has an answer for the new convert leading a lonely life in the world. I think we read this at Trapeza after you left. Enter as much as possible into the church's spirit as a way of thought and life. Your lowliness, while difficult to bear, is good, because only out of suffering comes spiritual growth. It will pass as you get more and more into the church spirit through continually nourishing yourself with it daily reading. Even if little, it is very important in this struggle. About the priesthood, treasure the idea now in your heart. The more experience you have in life and in suffering, I know you don't like that word, but even if you don't go out and seek suffering, at least be prepared to accept it, what little God allows you, and accept it gladly. The better prepared you'll be for the priesthood. This might be a different article that I'm thinking about, but I seen the name, Father Dmitry Dudko, and I thought it was going to kind of be about him, but I'm wrong. But I am going to continue reading this. It seems good. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, definitely don't feel well. I'm not going to keep this up probably long. I mean, I'll probably finish this and go drink some orange juice or something. I don't know what's up. So, okay. This is a letter to a young priest. He wrote, "Do not be depressed that there are people rising up against you in your parish. If everyone loved you, then I would say there is some trouble there, because you were probably catering too much to people when giving pastoral advice. Christ was also hated, and crucified. Why should we expect everyone to suddenly love us if we're following in the steps of Christ? Just be careful that your pastoral conscience is pure, and fear not hatred from others, but hatred within yourself." That's the point that's kind of coming to my mind right now, is this idea of like a false peace. We can have this sort of false peace sometimes where we think things are good. I think that'll be the peace that Antichrist offers in a way. It's this outward peace, but internally it's kind of fake. So, it says, I lost my place. Oh, where'd it go? Okay, so he says, "Fear not hatred from others, but hatred from within yourself." Father Seraphim did not reserve his counsels on suffering for those who happened to be experiencing it. In 1979, he received a letter from a young man who was preparing for baptism and was already on fire with the Orthodox zeal. This young catechumen had read a book which the Brotherhood had just printed, and which Father Seraphim had sent to him. St. Simeon, the new theologian, the sin of Adam, the homilies on the fall of man, and his redemption through Jesus Christ. Quote, towards the end of the book, the man wrote, I found I was underlining nearly every sentence, and often tears would come to my eyes. But such tears that are the very ones which entreat the Mother of God to send us in our morning prayers. Such tears have a cleansing effect upon the soul. This man was dreaming of gradually forming a small, semi-monastic community in the city, and expressed hopes that his present roommate, a former street person of Jewish background, would become an Orthodox Christian. His friend D, however, warned him against being carried away by such dreams. Here was what Father Seraphim wrote to the young catechumen. D is right. Don't be taken up by fantasies, but don't entirely squash them either. Without dreams, we can't live. May God grant you your Reuben the grace to be baptized and find his place to be a fruitful Orthodox Christian. May God grant you to continue with such freshness towards orthodoxy as you felt with reading St. Simeon's homilies. It says, be aware, however, that this will be possible only if you accept it with humility and submission to God's will. It is not too difficult to become exalted by the richness and the depth of our Orthodox faith, but to temper this exaltation with humility and sobriety, which come through the right acceptance of suffering. It's not an easy thing. In so many of our Orthodox people today, especially converts, one can see a frightful thing. There's much talk about the exalted truths and the experience of true orthodoxy, but it's mixed with pride and with a sense of one's own importance for being in on something, which most people don't see. From this comes the criticism against which you've already been warned. May God keep your heart soft and filled with the love for Christ and your fellow man. If you will be able to have a spiritual father with whom you can confide the feelings of your heart and can trust his judgments, all this will be easier for you. But if it's pleasing to God for you to have such a spiritual father, it will come naturally, as all things do in spiritual life with time, patience, suffering, and coming better to know yourself. In another place, Father Seraphim wrote, indeed, how we must all learn and relearn that our pretensions and ideals must be tested by reality and forged in suffering. He was very concerned about those who use the riches of orthodoxy not to struggle for righteousness, but precisely as a means to escape struggle. He was acquainted with unwed mother who, out of the religious zeal, quote, wanted to give up responsibility for her children, putting them in other people's homes. After Father Seraphim wrote, if she is relieved of the, quote, problem of her children, her petition is almost guaranteed. She is making a bad mistake in thinking that once she is, quote, rid of her children, she can then begin to think about a convent and real, quote, spiritual life. Because if we do not realize that our spiritual struggle begins right now with whatever God has given us, and all the more if we ourselves have gotten into a difficult situation, we will not begin the, quote, spiritual life later either. And so, if she only knew her salvation could lie in her suffering through the raising of her own children. But if she doesn't suffer this through, then later when she thinks to be starting real, quote, spiritual life, she'll find she has nothing at all. And, quote, spiritual life, which begins after we are rid of present problems, is only an abstraction. I think all this is true, but the real spiritual benefit of suffering through comes only if one voluntarily accepts it. To the mother herself, Father Seraphim wrote, we realize that raising your children is very difficult for you, but that is your cross God has given you. And I must tell you frankly that you can scarcely receive your salvation in any other way by trying your best to raise them up well. Spiritual life begins when things seem absolutely, quote, hopeless. That is when one learns to turn to God and not to our own feeble efforts and ideas. Wow, that's pretty deep. Uh, but I think that's a pretty, that's a pretty big, good example of kind of spiritual deception where we kind of see ourselves with these lofty ideas, like, you know, I don't know, that's pretty extreme. But anyways, follow the teachings of the Holy Fathers. Father Seraphim counsel people not to be quick to calculate and measure their own spiritual state. In 1975, he wrote to an Orthodox convert, don't worry too much about how spiritually poor you are. God sees that. But for you, it is expected to trust in God and pray to Him as best as you can, never to fall into despair, and to struggle according to your strength. If you ever begin to think you are spiritually well off, then you can know for sure that you aren't. True spiritual life, even on the most elementary level, is always accompanied by suffering and difficulties. Therefore, you should rejoice in all your difficulties and sorrows. To another young man who wanted to leave the Jordanville seminary because he felt like he's making no spiritual progress there, Father Seraphim wrote, "We understand very well your situation as you describe it in your letter. Of course, what you say is, quote, correct as far as it goes, but you're allowing yourself to make one basic mistake. You're making yourself the judge of your own spiritual state. In your present state of knowledge and experience, you are not able to see whether you need an aspirin or an operation. So try to humble yourself a little to the extent of serving stricter. Wait. So what does he say here? An aspirin or an operation. So try to humble yourself a little to the extent of seeing that you don't know what is best for you. Then what is the answer? To find a stricter place? Not now. If you do, you will probably regret it. It's very doubtful that this will give you the spiritual growth that you need and are looking for. Neither, quote, strictness or, quote, freedom is a guarantee of spiritual growth. Some people under, quote, freedom become spiritually loose and never grow. But we have also seen those trained under relative strictness who have also made no growth, but on the contrary, have thought that they have grown while actually falling into the disease of vainglory and pride, believing that their instructor was taking care of these problems for them. Under both the forms of life, one must walk in the fear of God and with discernment. Your answer, if I may be so bold as to tell you, is to be patient, endure with good hope of all the temptations that come your way, and withholding your judgment as to whether you need an aspirin or an operation, until you have acquired more knowledge and experience, which is why you went to Jordanville in the first place. Your opinion will be much more sound after several more years of seminary and experience in an Orthodox community. You're too young in Orthodoxy to be evaluating your spiritual growth. That's actually a sign of your pride. Be patient, endure, observe, learn. And when the time comes, there will come ways of testing your real spiritual growth. In a word, the temptation to leave Jordanville after committing yourself to the seminary and the life of a novice seems to come from the devil on the right side. To knock you off the path will give you the best progress for a seemingly good and plausible reason. Do you remember how today's Saint Cyril of White Lake thought that he would be more spiritually profited by sitting in a quiet cell than by laboring in the noisy kitchen? And that it did not turn out at all in the way uh, at all as his inexperienced judgment thought it would. Take that as your example and warning when these thoughts come to you from the right side. The noisy kitchen can give you much valuable spiritual experiences, even if it might not seem to at the time. The feeling of emptiness, worldly vanity, helpless against temptations will pass. But you should accept all this now as your cross, struggling according to your strength, and not being so proud as to think that to think that you should be above them. Over the years, Father Seraphim received letters from Orthodox college students who were disillusioned by the lack of love and truth in the modern academic world. Um, like the seminarian above the letters, sometimes they wanted to abandon what they had begun. Father Seraphim, of course, could well sympathize with them, having once been painfully disillusioned with the modern academic world himself. But as in other councils, he encouraged the students to learn and grow from what place was right in front of them. In general, he would advise that they finish their education as he himself had done. To one student who complained that having to study the works of Immanuel Kant and B.F. Skinner, or I guess that was taking its spiritual toll on him, Father Seraphim wrote, "I hope you will be able to force yourself to finish your courses. Be surprised how later some of these things, which now seem so useless, will turn out to have a use after all, even Kant and Skinner." To another college student, he sent his guidance. College life will doubtless give you many temptations, but remember that learning in itself is useful and can be used in later in a Christian way. Try to avoid the idle activities and temptations you'll meet to serve no useful purpose, so that even in a godless atmosphere you can redeem the time, as the Apostle Paul teaches, and makes maximum use of the opportunities you're given for learning. Echoing Christ's words to take no thought for the morrow, Matthew 6:34. Father Seraphim gave his advice to someone who was wondering what to do after he got his college degree. He says, "Perhaps you do not know what's next. Get the degree first, and then trust in God to open up the way. The political economic situation in the U.S. is evidently everywhere in the West is rapidly deteriorating. Worse, the church situation becomes very bad. Your situation is not unique. In San Francisco, suddenly some parish is becoming empty, as the old priests die and there are no young ones to replace them. And it's doubtful if more than a few see the cause that orthodoxy has too long been, quote, taken for granted. And it does not preserve itself automatically, but all this only prepares us for catacomb times, when our opportunities are perhaps greater than ever. We can't see the future, but we know this, that if you love God and His Orthodox Church and your fellow man, God can and will use it. Only stay in contact with fellow Orthodox strugglers. They do exist." How's everybody doing? Yeah, that's I'm reading that, and History of Resistance lately, and yeah, that's a good place to start if you haven't read it. It's a good book. How you doing, Isaac? What's up, man? Um, 4 minute days until my wife and I become catechumens. Congratulations, man. Sunrise. What's up, brother? Yeah. Well, oh, I see what you're saying here. All right. Okay. So, let me get back to this little reading. Hope everybody's all right, and I hope you're having a blessed night. So, and again, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so I'm not going to stay on very long. I'm going to finish this little article, and then I'm out. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. So it says, in some of Father Seraphim's pastoral letters, we find guidance on the struggle against fleshly sins. To one person he wrote, about carnal warfare, when bodily labors are impossible or difficult, St. Abba Dorotheus says, flee quickly to the prayer of Jesus, and you will find repose. Pray ceaselessly, saying, Lord Jesus Christ, deliver me from shameful passions. To another person who was lamenting over his own weaknesses and was saying to mention sexual faults to a parish priest in confession, Father Seraphim exhorted, do not be afraid to confess the fleshy sins. What, do you think you're so holy? God allows you to fall in order to humble you. Get up and walk in fear and trembling. Struggle against them, but do not despair. No matter what happens, strength in Orthodox firmness confirms very gradually. Comes very gradually, rather. What you do every day helps build it up, and if you fall, humility and self-awareness build it up. Yet another person, your battle with demonic fornication is not as unusual as you may think. This passion has become very strong in our evil times. The air is saturated with it, and the demons take advantage of this to attack you in a very vulnerable spot. Every battle with passions also involves demons, who give the almost unnoticeable, quote, suggestions to trigger the passions and otherwise cooperate in arousing them. But human imagination always enters in here, and is unwise to distinguish exactly where our passions and imaginations leave off and demonic activity begins. You should just continue fighting. That the demons attack you in your dreams is a sign of progress. It means that they are retreating, seeing that you are resisting conscious sin. God allows this so that you will continue fighting. Often this demon goes away altogether for a while, and one can have a false sense of security that one is, quote, above this passion. But all the Holy Fathers warn that one cannot consider this passion conquered before the grave. Continue with your struggle and take refuge in humility, seeing what base sins you're capable of, um, and how you are lost without the constant help of God who calls you to a life above these sins. It can be seen from these letters that Father Seraphim was gentle and encouraging with those of his spiritual children who were truly suffering, with those who were giving into sin and they were justifying, rationalizing it, however. Father Seraphim took a different approach altogether. In the following letter to a young man who is leading unwary souls into unnatural sexual sin while thinking to evangelize them, Father Seraphim did not mince words. My child, you are deceiving yourself and going the way of perdition. I will not be falsely kind and hide this fact from you. You talk about helping others, but you're leading them to perdition. You know that by preaching the faith to and then sinning with them, you have inoculated him against church, and now you think you're going to save? Wake up, my child, if you still can. You've detected a distance between us that you do not understand. That is the distance you yourself have placed by choosing your own way and rejecting everyone who has tried to guide you. It is that same distance which later on, or even now, you fill with Deacon Nick Terry, with all true Orthodox Christians, and then with the Holy Orthodoxy itself. You justify yourself to yourself with the argument that you are somehow special. Your human problems are too much for you and must be allowed to develop themselves. And before you can really choose Christ, no, my child, you're not special. 1,000 crazy converts have already gone that way, and you are joining them. Forgive my harsh words. I speak them because I really love you, and I do not wish you to be lost. I do not cease to pray for my erring child. I will gradually suffer with you and for you, but I will do you no good unless you give up your own understanding of how to live. This last weekend, we were visited by a zealous priest from the East Coast. What a deep fellow feeling between us. Based on commitment and zeal and deep suffering to all of us, you will remain a stranger as long as you trust yourself. May God save you from perdition. I am praying for the unenlightened. Do not deceive him further. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick break real quick. I'm going to leave my viewers here, and I appreciate everybody. I'm going to leave you with the music box. I need to grab something to drink, and I'll see what's up shortly. I do have. Depending on how this goes, I might read a little bit more or something else after the article. I might not. I don't know. So let me see. I can't see right now. Okay. Okay, we're back. Okay, it says, Father Seraphim's patristic understanding in the place. I don't want to read this. This is... Okay. So, maybe another time, because it's just a little off topic, and I'm not really into it. Okay. So, like I said, I'm not feeling too well, so I'm just going to read a couple quotes, and I'm probably going to get out of here. So it says, some of these trials will come from the side of pleasing deception, from the signs and lying wonders, which we begin to see even now. Others will come from fierce and naked evil, which is already visible in Jonestown, Cambodia, and the Gulag Archipelago. Those who wish to be true Christians in these frightful days had better begin to become serious about their faith, learning what true Christianity is, learning to pray to God in the spirit of truth, and learning to know who Christ is, and to whom alone we have salvation. Okay, and all right. He says, if Christ were to walk into this world today, do you know what would happen to him? Be placed in a mental institution and given psychotherapy, just as would his saints. The world would crucify him today, just as it did 2,000 years ago. For the world has not learned a thing except more devious forms of hypocrisy. He says here, the feeling of emptiness, worldly vanity, helplessness against temptations will pass. Remember death, embrace God. He says, God expects our struggle, and he will send his grace as we need it. Not rightness, but love. Be kind to one another. Smile and be cheerful. Carry one another's burdens for the sake of Christ. So this is actually pretty interesting. In 1961, Father Seraphim visited a bookstore in San Francisco. Before his conversion, a postcard of a Serbian icon of the Mother of God caught his attention. A storm raged inside him, and he prayed to her to help him serve her son, Jesus Christ, and to help him make sense of his life. A few months later, he would meet St. John Maximovich. Okay, I think this is going to be the last quote I read. It says, in an age of almost universal darkness and deception, when most Christians, Christ has become precisely what Orthodox teaches means to be Antichrist. The Orthodox Church of Christ alone possesses and communicates the grace of God. This is precisely the treasure of the very existence of which is not so much as suspected by the, quote, Christian world. The Christian world indeed joins hands with the forces of darkness in order to seduce the faithful of the Church of Christ blindly into trusting the name of Jesus will save them even in their apostasy and blasphemy. Mindless of the fearful warning of the Lord, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name cast out demons, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. That's Matthew 7:22 and 23. And that's from the Orthodox Word. Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. I appreciate everybody for stopping by. And I hope you guys have a blessed night. And maybe I'll be able to read for a longer time next time. But thank you. And hope you guys have a good night. Later.